Welcome into the WholeHog Podcast. Seth Campbell joined alongside Matt Jones and Scotty Borderline. We are back, and guys, we're getting closer and closer to kickoff. It's about that time. You know, football has started. College football has been here for 2 weeks now. NFL football has kicked off. It's starting to feel like football season, despite everything that's been through. It's kind of crazy that this is starting to feel like football season, and this is becoming reality as long as those COVID cases at the University of Arkansas can stay down.
Yeah, I've kind of lost track of time a little bit over the last 6 months because of the virus. I thought it was interesting on our message board. A guy named Jim Daniels, someone who we know real well, and he lives up in Colorado, just a little bit east of Denver, and he said a couple of days ago that they had snow on the ground. And my initial thought was, it's weird for it to be snowing in August. And then, it kind of hits me like it's September.
Yeah,
and not only is it September, we're well into September. And it just doesn't feel like it really because there's not college football. You kind of, it's kind of like that's, for me, it's when I watch that first college football game, it's okay, September's here. We're into the fall. And we've had a lot of football. And the high school season is into its third week now in Arkansas. I mean, they're
that's crazy.
In one more week, they're going to be playing conference games. I'm ready for something new, and this has been such a long preseason for the Razorbacks. It's going to end up being probably close to 2 months before they finally get to play Georgia, if you count those walkthrough practices as part of the preseason, which I would.
The first couple of weekends of college football have been like the UCA Austin Peay game was pretty good. It was fun to just like have that on in the background while I was doing some other stuff.
Yeah,
like
not actually
like
watching
on a
it.
Saturday. Yeah. But like the first couple of weeks have been kind of like an appetizer for college football. I'm ready for like the first big weekend, kind of get some, I don't know if you'd call them marquee games, but like more of your bigger games. I'm tired of like the BYU Navy game.
What a blowout.
Oh my gosh. Like I turned that thing, I didn't get to watch the start of it. And so I finally turned it on like late second quarter, and it's like 31-0. And I'm like, there's no reason to watch this. And so you got to wait even longer. Get some.
I don't feel like we're even
football.
to the appetizers yet. We're like at that point where they bring the water to your table right after you sat down at the
Is
restaurant.
that what SMU Texas State was?
Yeah, that might have been
Just
the ice in the water at
Yeah.
that point. I think the appetizer may be this week when Clemson gets to play and some of these ACC teams get to play. And isn't it so weird that we thought we were going to be in South Bend this weekend? This would have been the weekend that Arkansas
Yeah, I
was going to
remember
play
you
at Notre
talking
Dame.
to me about potentially going to that. But yeah,
Yeah,
I should have a story to tell about that experience.
It's going to be interesting to see. I thought it was kind of funny. I don't know if anybody else's mind worked like this, but Arkansas did a lot of scheduling in this offseason football-wise for Power 5 conference teams for the non-conference games. And then they finally got it to where they're going to play teams and they can schedule teams in back-to-back years because, Texas was throwing things off and the game that Texas owed Arkansas and everything. So they had all of this finally worked out. It took until like 2030 something, but they had it finally all worked out. And then COVID hits and they're going to have to reschedule the Notre Dame game sometime. Yeah. And it's just going to mess everything up again.
I would think Notre Dame gets scheduled, but I don't think it's going to get rescheduled for several years.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be that we end up seeing but I don't think Arkansas is going to go to Notre Dame in 25 instead of Notre Dame coming here. I mean, it could be a thing where we're at the end of the decade and this game still hasn't been played. Reminds me a little bit of the TCU series. That thing was scheduled in like 2001 for 04 or 05, and then it ended up not getting played until 2016 and 17. It's crazy how long it takes for some of these games to get played.
Yeah, how they schedule out that Arkansas's Oklahoma State game when they were talking about that, it's not even in this decade. It's
2033.
Kind of crazy to me. Yeah, that's just absolutely insane. All right, guys. Well, on today's podcast, we've got a fully loaded one. We're going to talk football, basketball, and baseball. We're going to hit all three. We're going to go through the position battles. So there's some positions on the football team that really aren't up for grabs. You've got the quarterback position that's Felipe Franks to lose. You've got the running back position that's Rakeem Boyd's. But there's other positions on the team that might be up for grabs. Some on the offensive line, maybe in the back end of the secondary. So we'll talk about those. Then we'll also talk about Justin Smith. Scotty got to talk to Eric Musselman, and he put together a story on Justin Smith, Indiana transfer. And then Also, the ACC has done something that just seems ludicrous. They want to say every single team in the NCAA
Crazy,
tournament.
man.
March Madness.
That
I
would
like some college basketball. I don't like it that much.
That would be something that is insane. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then baseball. Baseball's coming along. They started. Matt talked to Dave Van Horn this past week. So we'll talk a little bit about baseball. They've got a new facility that's coming up. And they've got some guys that are on campus and a fully loaded roster. When you talk about fully loaded, I think that's the definition of it, with guys that came back and got the extra year because of their season being canceled by COVID-19. All right, so let's circle back around and let's start at the beginning. Guys, position battles, and let's actually start on the offensive line. What do we think
Best
about
place to start.
That's where games are won and lost. So let's talk about, let's start in the center, with the center. What do you think?
You go ahead, football guy.
I feel like John Madden when I start talking about the offensive line. You know, you ever watch those old games with Madden and Summerall or Madden and Michaels, and you know he always wanted to talk about the big offensive. It's so important to a football team, and I feel like it gets so overlooked quite often. And hey, I love the fact that Sam Pittman is a head coach now, coming from the offensive line. I'd love to see more offensive line coaches get a shot as head coaches. You know, it just seems like they kind of get that stigma as just an offensive line guy, and then they don't get a chance as a coordinator, and then because they don't get a chance as a coordinator, they don't get a chance as a head coach. You know, I think the interesting thing on the offensive line right now is that what we might see when the September 26th game against Georgia rolls around is that you might see an instance where it's not the best player necessarily out of position, but it's the best five from a cohesion standpoint. So what I mean by that is Ricky Stromberg may end up being the best center on the team, but he may end up being a starter at guard because their offensive line as a unit is better with him in that position than it might be with him at center and somebody else playing that position. And so right now, I think we talked about this last week. I think left tackle's probably set with Myron Cunningham. Yeah. I think right guard is pretty well sewn up with Bo Limmer, who's been one of the surprises of the preseason. And if I were betting, I would say Ricky Stromberg is going to start at center. But that's just based on where we've seen them, in what we've seen them practicing. You know, I could still see an instance where maybe Stromberg is the center and Ty Clary is the left guard, or maybe Clary is the center and Stromberg's the guard, or maybe Luke Jones, is good enough to play in there at one of those positions. And, then the other one is right tackle. Really, it seems like it's between Dalton Wagner and Noah Gatlin right now, although I did think that it was interesting hearing Sam Pittman on his radio show talk about Brady Latham on Wednesday night.
Yeah. Said
that Brady Latham leads the team in fights started this preseason. He said we don't track fights, and we really don't want fights. He said, but basically he said because of the way that Latham plays through the whistle, it'll cause some. He calls it strain. If you ever hear Sam Pittman talk about strain, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about a player straining through the end of the play. And so I just thought that was kind of interesting hearing him talk about Brady Latham. I know that they've been pleased with Brady Latham, and I think they're pleased more with their depth on the offensive line than they thought they were going to be. Not saying it's going to be this real strong unit for them, but I think what they've found is that they have more players who they think can probably play on this level than maybe they thought would be the case when they were coming in here in December and January.
When you hear Sam Pittman talk about strain, and you mentioned Brady Latham and Bo Limmer, he kind of talks about those guys similarly when it comes to strain. Those guys are play until the echo of the whistle type guys. And Brady Latham, I think, has in the last maybe couple of weeks has started to cross train over at left guard too. So that throws another body into that left guard conversation. I don't know that he's at the level that maybe a Luke Jones or Ty Clary at left guard, but you like hearing the compliments that Sam Pittman's been given to him. I kind of like an offensive lineman with a nasty streak, kind of like Dan Skipper without all the tripping penalties and whatnot.
Just about to say that.
But I like to hear that he's a fiery guy. You want kind of those nasty, gritty guys on your line. I think right tackle's interesting. I was trying to come up with a depth chart recently, and at right tackle, I think it's Noah Gatlin or Dalton Wagner, but I had Brady Latham kind of in the mix there too, because Dalton Wagner and Noah Gatlin have both missed a little bit of the preseason, and we've seen Brady Latham kind of fill in at first or second team right tackle some. but Dalton Wagner started every game last year, but that was because Noah Gatlin was out with an injury. So Noah Gatlin's back, Dalton Wagner's back, and he's got more experience, I would say, than Noah Gatlin does. But if both guys are healthy, I think Noah Gatlin's probably the guy. We'll see. But yeah, I think Luke Jones is kind of like the guy that I'm most interested in on that offensive line. So where does he fit? Because like he could play. I think he could play left guard. You know, on my depth chart, I've got Luke Jones or Ty Collier at left guard, and then Shane Clennon, you know, maybe fighting for scraps. But Luke Jones, Sam Pittman has said that he's been kind of fascinated with how easily Luke Jones has also been able to slide over and play center too. So you're seeing plenty of cross training. I think they feel pretty good about, you know, maybe 6 or 7, maybe 8 guys there.
Yeah, I like what Matt said about maybe this offensive line is deeper than they initially thought, and not that it's deep in the way that an Alabama or a Georgia is deep, that these guys are quality and can back up 10, 11 guys deep, but the fact that they have 8 to 9 guys that they think can play minutes for the Arkansas Razorbacks, I think is a plus for them. Pittman said it really at the beginning of fall camp is they're looking for the best 5 guys on the offensive line. It doesn't necessarily matter if you've played center your entire time. If you're going to be better and the offensive line is going to be better by moving Stromberg over, then that's what's going to happen. I feel like that Pittman realizes the importance of the offensive line, like we talked about him being a former offensive line coach, and he's going to make sure that he gives the skill guys a chance by putting the best 5 offensive linemen out there on the field.
A couple of thoughts about the offensive line. They're bigger. They are noticeably bigger. I thought it was interesting on his radio show. Sam Pittman said, "I want big, fat guys playing on the offensive line."
These dudes got some belly jiggle.
Yeah, he said I don't want to see, you know, slim guys playing on the offensive line, and that's what Chad Morris and Dustin Fry said they wanted. You know, they wanted smaller players, and I thought it was interesting that Sam said he thinks that this team is a lot bigger, but they haven't really sacrificed their agility. You know, he credited their strength coach Jamil Walker for that. And, you know, then the other thing I thought that was interesting listening to him on his radio show the other night was talking about he thinks they've got 6 players who can snap the ball. And he said when they started practicing this preseason, that was the number one thing they did on offense, was making sure that they had a center who could get the ball to the quarterback quickly and reliably. And we've seen that the last couple of years where that's been an issue with this team.
Especially quickly.
Yeah, quick. Yeah,
and that's why Ty Clary is playing left.
Well, you know, I mean, even reliably. And we saw so many high snaps the last couple of seasons. I
saw one this preseason.
Yeah.
From you know who.
But it's he said they feel like they've got 6 centers now who can play the position and get the ball to the quarterback reliably. And he didn't say his name, but I assume one of those is Ty Clary. I think they like what they've seen from him, you know, improving his snap ability.
All right, my guys, moving from the offensive line to a guy that can sometimes line up on the offensive line, but is also going to be used in the skill position a lot, and that's the tight end room. You got to like what you see out of Hudson Henry when he is out there on the practice field. Some of the highlights that we've gotten from camp, you've seen him be able to make catches, be pretty agile at that tight end position, and that's what he's good at. The big question mark with him was his blocking ability. And then just this tight end room in general, it's pretty thin compared to a lot of other places and compared to what you want in the SEC. So, Scotty, I give it up to you first. What are your thoughts on the tight end room? Yeah, we kind of think that Hudson Henry is going to be the one, but kind of who's behind him, and is there anybody challenging Hudson?
Marcus Henderson's coming for that job. I'm kidding. They moved him over there.
Former offensive lineman.
Yeah, you talking about him thin. They added some beef when, you know, moved Marcus Henderson over there. They really like Marcus Henderson at left tackle, kind of backing up Myron Cunningham. But that tight end room, it's the progress in that room is something that's asked to Pittman about every time we get him, and that's a group that is obviously it's very light on experience. And Hudson Henry, you would think in a perfect world he's going to be healthy, he's going to be your number one. But right now, Sam Pittman said on his radio show on Wednesday that they feel comfortable playing 11 personnel, but they're a little bit iffy about who that second tight end is going to be. I mean, is it Blake Kern? We don't know. Colin Sutherland, not sure. We've heard Sam Pittman talk about Nathan Bax a little bit, but I think Sam Pittman might be the only one that knows who Nathan Bax is. I mean, and then you're bringing Marcus Henderson over just to kind of beef the room up. Like, I know he may have played a little bit of tight end, maybe some H-back in high school, but I don't know. He's probably in there more for blocking purposes than anything else. Maybe his high school coaches threw him a bone in high school.
They're just trying to bring up the average weight of the tight end room so that it looks better on paper.
Yeah, I think they need to figure out fairly soon who that second tight end is, and I think that'll, I don't know, it makes you feel more at ease, but you feel a little bit more comfortable, if you identify that second tight end and play some heavier personnel.
I think the fact that he's mentioning all these tight ends when he's talking about it is a pretty good indication that they don't know who that second tight end is going to be.
Yeah,
and,
that's scary.
Hudson, what's interesting to me about Hudson is that he has had to learn really the tight end position. It was kind of misleading that he was the number one tight end in the country coming out of high school, because if you ever watch Pulaski Academy, their tight end is just another receiver on the field. They put him out in the slot. They're running, deep vertical routes down the field. And so he was 220-pound wide receiver at Pulaski Academy. And, now he's being asked to do something a lot different. And that was the case last year too. I think it's going to be more so the case this year. I did think it was interesting, something that Pittman said the other day about his tight ends is that he doesn't want them just to be a big guy that's in there to block. He wants them to be a vertical threat, somebody who can beat a safety over the top or maybe a nickelback. And he thinks they've got the speed to do that. They're just not experienced enough right now. And, it could be 7-8 games maybe into the season before you start to see some of that experience coming into play. I think Henry's their number one guy. I don't know who they've got behind him. I've heard him say all those names that Scotty said. He said Blaine Toll when he was asked about it the other night. I think at tight end and at linebacker, the concerning thing for this team is that you just don't see a lot of separation between players, whether that's your one and your two or your two. There's just not a lot of separation between the players right now. And I think by this point in the preseason, you would like to see more separation between the players than what you're seeing.
Yeah, you mentioned it. You'd like to see the separation. When there's coaches, you almost have to read through coaches speak in these fall camps. And
really?
Yeah. And y'all have done it a lot longer than I have, so y'all are a lot better at it. But the coaches speak of, if they're mentioning a lot of guys at a particular position, that's not always the best thing. Because that means, like you were saying, Matt, that nobody has stood out.
Yeah, sometimes it's a good thing. I mean, we'll talk about defensive backs here in a little bit. I think they're mentioning a lot of defensive backs right now because they really like how that unit's playing. At tight end and linebacker, it's a different story.
And let's move on over to the linebackers, as Matt just mentioned there. That's a big fat question mark as well, because guys aren't necessarily healthy in the preseason and fall camp, and we haven't really seen a cohesive unit stay out there for multiple times in multiple reps the few times that we get to see practice. So, Matt, thoughts on the linebacking core for the Razorbacks?
I think it's Bumper Pool and Hayden Henry are going to be your starting linebackers on opening day. I think you will probably see more nickel-type coverage because I'm not sure they like what they have, in their 4-3 look. Not saying that they won't run a 4-3 look. I just think that maybe they like what the defense looks like as a whole better, with a nickel look and a guy like a Greg Brooks on the field. My thoughts are that it's Poole and then it's Henry. I know that there's some thought that Dion Edwards is playing well right now in the preseason. But it goes back to what I said earlier. You're just not seeing a lot of separation between that first team guy and that second team guy. And I think linebacker is easily the weakest link on the defense.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think from the practice footage that I've seen, I don't want to give away my secrets of like how I'm like kind of piecing things together depth chart wise, but like
he's got somebody filming from Yoakum.
Instagram stories from players. Like they love to put practice footage up of them making plays.
They do.
So when I would look at X player's Instagram story on the defense, you can kind of see, and they're kind of like a skeleton, like kind of 7-on-7 type stuff. And you say Bumper Pool and Grant Morgan on the field at the same time. So I think those might be your top guys. Hayden Henry's definitely going to be in there. And I think Levi Draper is going – I think he's picking up the defense. I know Sam Pittman was asked about him a little bit last week, maybe after the last scrimmage. He likes what he's seen from Levi Draper. You know, he's picking up the defense to a point where he's reacting instead of thinking while he's playing. I know that's the greatest coach speak in fall camp that you can hear. But that's another capable body, I think. Deion Edwards, you know, with the top three guys kind of who knows where, Deion Edwards has kind of stepped in a little bit. You're hearing his name a little bit. He's, you know, maybe recovered a fumble, forced a fumble, had a tackle for loss the other day in the scrimmage that the defense, it sounds like, overwhelmingly won in the second scrimmage. Andrew Parker, don't really know. He's probably going to be a backup guy. Waiting on him to make a jump. I think he's got the physically he's there. Mentally, not real sure if he's picking up the defense. But with those top guys just kind of mysteriously in the background right now, I think those reps that he's gaining are pretty valuable. So maybe if like a Bumper Pool or a Grant Morgan come out, maybe Andrew Parker steps in. The linebackers just, like Matt said, it's a question mark.
My guess is that if they go to a 4-3 look, Levi Draper will be the third linebacker in the game.
Is the linebacker position the weakest position group for the Arkansas Razorbacks?
Maybe just because your backups are Andrew Parker and Deion Edwards, and Sam Pittman's even mentioned like a true freshman in JT Towers. Like your depth is not great. Like Matt talked about this maybe last week. Like your first team guys, you feel pretty good about, but after that, there's like a drop off after that. So
well, the other thing is that it would be a linebacker or tight end, and on offense you can do some things to disguise your tight end or even take your tight ends out of the game. You can go to a 4 receiver set. You can't run a defense without a linebacker. And so I think that, I don't know if it's the weakest position on the team, but I think it's probably the easiest right now to identify as a group that could be taken advantage of.
All right, guys, let's move on to our last position group we're going to talk about today. And this isn't really necessarily a position group that we're worried about depth-wise, but really a position group that we don't know who's going to start because really of the opposite problem that there's been a few guys that have stood out, and that's in the secondary, the cornerbacks and safeties. Who do y'all think will end up being those first 4 guys that they throw out in the secondary, Scotty?
About safeties and corners,
yeah.
I would say.
Well, it's got to be Monteric Brown as one of the cornerbacks.
Buster Brown's one of the corners. Jerry Jacobs, I said last week he probably hasn't, wrapped up a starting spot. I would probably tell myself I was dumb. I think he's probably got the corner spot locked up opposite of Monteric Brown, and then Joe Fouché at a safety, and then it's either Jalen Catalon or Miles Mason at the other safety. Jalen Catalon missed some time with a meniscus, but he's back. He was fully cleared the few days before the second scrimmage, and then Sam Pittman said on his radio show that Catalon had a really good second scrimmage.
Called it outstanding.
Yeah. So I think Miles Mason may start the season at that safety spot, but I think Jalen Catalon is going to apply some pressure, like some real pressure. So I don't know how much weight you want to put into Chad Morris saying that Jalen Catalon was like among the top 5 high school prospects he's ever seen live, but Jalen Catalon's got some real talent. I think he's going to be the real deal. He didn't play just a ton last year because he was battling through some injuries. What was it, a shoulder, and then now he's got some knee problem, or he's had a knee problem. It sounds like he's back though. I like the depth in the secondary for sure.
Yeah, I think safety is going to be Catalon and Joe Fouché. I think cornerback will be Jacobs and Monteric Brown. And then nickel's kind of an interesting spot to me because the thought is that Greg Brooks will be the starter there, but you hear a lot of chatter that they really like what they're seeing out of Jarquez McClellan, that he's a lot longer and
He's added a little bit of weight too. He was pretty thin last year.
Yeah, that he's able to, basically his length and his size, he's making more plays this season. So, maybe that's the position to really watch in the secondary, is that McClellan maybe giving Brooks a run for his money at that nickel position. And I think you're going to see the nickel back on the field quite a bit, for this defense.
Good stuff there, guys. Going around the offense and the defense, recapping the position battles that are happening in fall camp. We are getting eerily close to football at the University of Arkansas. First game against Georgia, September 28th. 6th. Dang it. I was trying to go between 6th and 8th, too. Oh, my goodness. Okay.
Do not show up on Monday night
at
Razorback Stadium.
That'd be kind of unfortunate. Be smarter than Seth. Know that the Razorbacks aren't playing on a Monday. All right, guys, before we move into our basketball talk and some NCAA wanting every single person in the entire basketball industry.
Well, it's just the ACC.
Well, yes, the ACC wants, but they want everybody in the basketball industry to be in the NCAA tournament. I think we should start our own NCAA team. We can maybe get in the tournament too. But before we head into that, let's just go around the campus real quick about what's happening in Razorback athletics. First of all, soccer, cross country, volleyball all have schedules that are put out, and it really affects Arkansas's cross country because they're going to move their schedule into March, and that could affect the indoor.
Yeah, so the regular season schedule is not going to go into March. There's some thought that the NCAA, and not only for cross country but for soccer and volleyball too, all of the fall sports that have had their championships, postponed to this point, they haven't said that they've been canceled. There's some thought that you might have the soccer championship in April, whereas usually it's in late November, early December, or the cross-country championships. There's some thought that those might be run in mid-March, whereas usually they're run the weekend of Thanksgiving or the weekend before Thanksgiving. And so let's start with the regular season. The soccer team's going to play 8 games. The volleyball team's going to play 8 games. The soccer season will have an SEC tournament. The volleyball season does not have an SEC tournament. So after those 8 regular season games, their season is over, unless they make whatever the NCAA's version of a postseason looks like in the spring. The soccer team, will go to Orange Beach. Typically, I think only 8, maybe 10 teams, maybe it's 12. Not all the teams qualify for the soccer tournament, is where I'm going with that, but this year they will. So everybody's guaranteed to go to Orange Beach this season. The Arkansas soccer team, of course, won the SEC championship last year. They got a lot of players back. They got their 3 top scorers back. They've got maybe the best defender in the country in Haley Van Fossen. They'll start their season September 19th against LSU. That's a Saturday afternoon here in Fayetteville. And then cross country, the women are going to run 3 meets. The men are going to run 2 meets, and then they will both run at the SEC meet in late October down in Baton Rouge. And what's interesting about what you're saying, Seth, the NCAA cross-country championships, if they get moved to March, then you have to look at the NCAA indoor track and field championships, which are scheduled for that week in Fayetteville. Arkansas is going to be the host for that, and this has been a big deal that they've been working toward for years, trying to get this event back in Fayetteville. And what the NCAA is doing with soccer and volleyball is one thing, but what they're trying to do with cross-country, moving it to spring, and then expect those distance runners to also be running indoors and outdoors, you can't peak that many times in that short of a time frame. And so I know that the track coaches, Nate Allen wrote a really good column about this week on our website. The track coaches are not happy with this potential change of moving the cross-country season into March because it really affects what they're trying to do. It's not that big of a deal at most programs. At Arkansas, it's a big deal because Arkansas, Oregon, maybe a couple of other teams, they want to be really good in cross-country and indoor and outdoor. Most teams are just specializing and putting all their scholarship money into being a really good track program or a really good distance program where you're running, well in cross-country. This affects a team that's trying to put a program that puts 3 good teams out every year, and probably affects a team like Arkansas more than anybody else. So that's something that's really interesting to watch over the next several months, how that plays out.
That'll be something to keep an eye on WholeHogSports.com. We'll have the latest for you there. And then also the latest chapter in the Bielema saga is going on. Matt is kept us all up to date. But I'd like to explain, if you could, Matt, a little bit about what is going on, because I've read every single article that you've put out and am still slightly confused.
So basically the nuts and bolts of the Bielema case is that the Razorback Foundation in January of 2019 quit making buyout payments to Bielema, essentially saying that he was in breach of his contract with the foundation. He signed a release and waiver agreement with the foundation in January of 18, a couple of months after he was fired as the head coach. That release and waiver agreement included a duty of mitigation on Bielema's part. What that duty of mitigation is, that's really some ambiguous language. If you ask me, you ask the attorneys on either side, they'll probably tell you differently. But they said he didn't, that he didn't make a good enough effort to mitigate the foundation's burden to pay him. The foundation was sued by Bielema's camp in federal court here in Fayetteville. The foundation tried to get that case thrown out of federal court, saying that any disagreements between the two sides were supposed to be heard in state court in Washington County. The federal judge who's overseeing the case, P.K. Holmes, he came out with a decision in late August that said that this is going to stay in federal court. And so now that it's staying in federal court, the Razorback Foundation has countersued Bielema, basically giving their side, they gave their side really of why they didn't continue to pay him in these court documents, their responses to the lawsuit back during the summer. But now as part of their countersuit, they've given maybe a little bit more detailed version of their side of the story. So at this point, we're full speed ahead toward a jury trial in June of 21. That's when the trial has been tentatively scheduled. I think, typically, I don't know the numbers, but I'd say probably a high percentage, maybe even into the 80s, 90% of these types of cases get settled out of court. You might see a settlement in this, or you might see it go to a jury trial. I think it'd be really fascinating if you see this go to a jury trial next month. And, I think that there's probably something to the fact that Bielema's camp wanted this in federal court, because if it goes to trial, whatever the decision is would be appealed to the 8th Circuit in St. Louis, as opposed to if it's in the state court system, it gets appealed to the Arkansas State Court in or the Arkansas Supreme Court in Little Rock. And so nobody has told me that. That's just kind of a gut feeling on my behalf. But yeah, it's pretty fascinating to watch this Brett Bielema case. And I really think that there's going to be a lot of programs that watch this closely, because the buyout issue is a huge deal in college sports right now.
For sure.
And you see a program like Arkansas that, ultimately you'd say they made two bad hires in a row in Brett Bielema and in Chad Morris. And as a result, over the course of a couple of years, they're having to pay both of them buyouts, close to $12 million in Bielema's case and more than $10 million in Morris's case. That's a huge deal. And then you throw on top of that, they were paying a buyout to Jeff Long for a little while. That was in the $4 to $5 million range. Now, they didn't end up paying all of that because he was hired at Kansas. And so, that part was mitigated. They were going to be due to owe Mike Anderson about $1 million a year for a couple of years, but he was able to get that job so quickly at St. John's. Man, when you have an economic shutdown like we've had, or downturn like we've had the last several months, it really shines a light on these contracts and how, I would say, vulnerable the universities or their foundations are to try to, in these contracts, because they're really one-sided contracts right now in most instances. It's usually the coach holds all the cards and the school holds very few. And I've talked to some coaches who aren't football coaches, who are just kind of observers of this, and they say that the universities are being taken advantage of basically in these contract negotiations, that these coaches have agents who that's their job. That's what they do. They negotiate with the hardest nosed people in sports and get these good deals. And the universities aren't necessarily, adapted or they're not necessarily equipped to go into those negotiations and get the best deals. And so I think that, the college athletics world, if this thing goes to trial, really has to be watching this closely and saying, is the coach going to be the one that the courts find is the or in this case, is Bielema going to be the one that the court finds was done wrong in this case, or does the university, the foundation, have a really strong case, and might we see in the future other universities in these buyout type situations, might we see them hold the coaches to the letter of the contract a little bit more?
Good stuff there from Matt. All right.
Was it?
It was entertaining, and it was a good breakdown of everything, Matt.
It's so. I mean, there's so many layers to this, though. You know what I mean? It's
not something that I shouldn't have said that we were going to explain that quickly and go around, because it's just not something that you can really explain quickly.
Well, no, not at all. I mean, there's been probably over 500 pages of court documents filed in this, and we could probably do a whole 2-hour podcast on this case and the potential ramifications of it.
Yeah. Matt has turned into a lawyer for sure. He's going to go pass his bar. All right, Scotty, now that you've come back after your bathroom break and, you took a lap around the building just to stretch it out, we welcome Scotty back in.
He took a nap while I was taking the Bielema case.
All right, guys, let's talk NCAA basketball and what's going on with the ACC. So they proposed that every single team make the NCAA tournament this year. Initial thoughts, Scotty?
I'm not a fan of it. How many teams would that be? It's north of 300.
Yeah, it's because there's people that are not playing or not eligible and everything.
You got a pretty good thing going with what you've been doing for a while now. I mean, I guess to me that it would kind of seem like you're giving everybody a participation trophy. And we talked about it, I guess, before we started recording, but I don't want to watch like Marist St. Bonaventure play at like noon on a Thursday.
That might be an entertaining matchup.
You would be getting a lot of games like that
or worse.
Yeah, or worse for sure. I don't really understand it, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, it is of the vein of the participation trophy.
I like college basketball a lot. That would be a 300+ team tournament would be exhausting.
Although I have said, it's like, guys, we just need to do what they used to do for the kickoff. I guess it wouldn't be kickoff. It would be tip-off of college basketball season, where they would start games at, say, noon, and then they would play for 24 hours straight. They'd have games, and some West Coast team was playing at 4 a.m. Eastern time or something like that. If they did that, I still think you would have to have, 10, 12, 14 games playing at the same time for every 2-hour time slot? That's insane. That's not great basketball.
It would get really watered down.
I think so. And does everybody get to hang a banner that they made the NCAA tournament?
That's what I'm saying. Everybody gets a participation trophy.
I haven't really thought about this a whole lot, but it seems to me like there's probably some selfishness on the ACC's part doing this, trying to make themselves, look like this champion for the little conferences, when in reality, I think the ACC just wants to see more of their members get into the NCAA tournament. When they had the NCAA tournament the last time in 2019, the ACC had 7 teams, and if I remember correctly, I think they thought that there were some other teams who got cut out that should have been able to be part of March Madness. ACC is a really good basketball conference. I mean, you've got Duke and Carolina, and just going down the list. Louisville, Notre Dame typically has a pretty good team. Virginia's been great. Florida State and
Syracuse is tough to knock
Syracuse. So I think probably what you're saying is that the ACC is kind of has some selfish motivations, and maybe hiding that as being this champion for the little guy. I'd hate to see it. I would hate to see an NCAA tournament where you had that many teams. Not saying that it necessarily would take away from the excitement of the tournament. I think there would definitely be some excitement. I just feel like it would be overwhelming. I mean, at 68 teams, you take away that first 4 round, and there's 6 rounds of the tournament. If there's 357 teams, you're talking about an 8-round tournament, and that's with roughly 100 of them getting a first-round bye.
Right. So some teams would have to
whatever
play
9.
9.
Yeah, I mean, or did teams get double buys at the start of the tournament? It just really, I think it runs a good thing that they have going with the NCAA tournament if the NCAA goes along with this. And I have a lot of doubts that the NCAA would actually go along with this. I think that this is just one of those deals where, the ACC is generating some headlines, but the likelihood of this really happening, I would say, is probably really small. I've always thought the NCAA tournament has pushed the envelope just enough not to ruin a good thing. It was 64 teams, and then they added the 65th, and now they've got 68. I don't think they do the first 4 correctly. I really hate to see conference tournament champions having to play play-in games to the NCAA tournament. I think the first 4 would be much better if you actually had 8 true bubble teams, and you had, say, like a Syracuse against an Arkansas in the first 4, and then the winner of that game gets into the NCAA tournament field. I think it's unfair that you've got a couple of 16 seeds that are having to play each other, and okay, so you win, and now you got to turn around and play Duke in 2 days. I don't think that's the right way to do the NCAA tournament. So where I was going with that, I think they pushed the envelope just enough that it's still a successful tournament. This would, I think this would be a deal breaker for a lot of people.
It also ruins my chances of getting that perfect bracket.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
It was tough enough with 68, but geez, I thought I was
can you
going to crack it.
imagine?
They had it last year. I was going to have a perfect bracket.
So many of these brackets are filled out by people who don't watch the season necessarily, and now, okay, here's the first round of the NCAA tournament. We got Montana State and Prairie View A&M. Pick that one.
It's like, well, I have.
And then after you pick that one, here's 60 more matchups that are pretty much just like that. That's
It could definitely hurt your product.
Lots of games that are going to make your eyes bleed.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily want to see that.
Yeah, no. Well, hopefully a team that's not going to make your eyes bleed, if they get to play this upcoming, I guess that's winter, will be the University of Arkansas Razorback basketball team. And Scotty was able to sit down with Musselman, and he got together a story about Justin Smith, the Indiana transfer, that it's kind of raising some eyebrows, isn't it, Scotty?
Yeah, Justin Smith has been a fixture in the practice highlight videos that the program has been putting on social media. I think one of the first videos that they put up, they were like, "Did you know that Justin Smith he recorded like a 48-inch vertical at the NBA Combine, maybe last year or the year before? That's crazy. 48 inches. I mean, you're jumping over a little person." And he's just, in all the videos, he's running the floor and he's tearing the rim apart. And that, when I talked to a couple of Indiana writers over the summer when Justin Smith committed, that's one of the things that they said he was going to bring to Arkansas was kind of the freaky athleticism in transition, kind of a high flyer. His athleticism was going to stand out. And he was probably going to be a plus defender. One of the guys that I talked to, Alex Bozic from Inside the Hall, said that Indiana was going to miss him most on the defensive end. And he had a career best personal defensive rating last year. It was a shade under 100, which it's pretty solid. And by all accounts, like the work that he's put in the offseason, one of the things that he's focused on is just becoming more of a consistent perimeter threat. And so far in his career, like through 3 years at Indiana, he hasn't been. Like, he's a 25% three-point shooter. I found a website that I like to go to for shot chart data is the Stepien, and I think he's somewhere in the 35% range last year on mid-range jump shots, and so his jumper's got to improve. He worked in the offseason to kind of change the narrative that he's a guy that is probably best suited to pull the trigger 12 feet and in. And he's also worked to, better his game off the dribble. And those are two things, perimeter shooting or just becoming a better jump shooter in general, and being able to create for himself off the bounce. Those are two things I was told this summer that he's not really proficient at. But talking to Eric Musselman, it seems like Justin Smith has taken I don't want to call it like a sizable step, but it's a noticeable step forward in terms of his jump shooting. And he thinks Justin Smith's going to be able to provide Arkansas with some production on the perimeter, maybe be a little bit better of a shooter than we've seen in the past. And I asked Musselman, just who are some guys that have just kind of, in a good way, maybe surprised you to this point in the preseason. And he mentioned Desi Sills. Desi's not really the most vocal guy, but he's kind of taken a step forward in that regard too. And he's kind of being a buddy coach. He's kind of helping the younger guys just kind of learn the system, kind of know the ins and outs of what they're doing. And then he mentioned Justin Smith. Justin Smith's been he said a stabilizer for them and a guy who he can count on day in and day out to kind of bring that effort, energy, and enthusiasm that he's looking for. So he's going to be a really big key piece to the puzzle for Arkansas. And he's a guy that, if you play a small ball lineup, can probably play the 4. And Muss said that, if you opt to floor a lineup that, maybe emphasizes height and length, he could probably play the off guard spot. So pretty versatile guy on both ends of the floor, I'd say. So he's going to be a big piece for them.
Good stuff there, Scotty. Basketball season is quickly approaching. They're kind of coming up with a plan for what is going to happen this basketball season.
Could be a bunch of bubbles.
This is not going to happen. It's not going to be at the University of Arkansas. But if there was a bubble at the University of Arkansas, I would live for that. Put me in the bubble. I'll watch college basketball all day long. I'll live at Bud Walton Arena.
I'm interested. Will they only play conference games this year? There's this talk about maybe putting conference teams in one location, almost like you have a conference tournament. Maybe sending them there at the end of November after Thanksgiving and keeping them there until really the start of the second semester begins in January. And maybe you play your full conference schedule over the course of 6 or 7 or 8 weeks. I don't know how realistic that is.
They should do that in Nashville. You could play some games in like Bridgestone Arena, and then maybe some at Vandy. I mean, that's
some at Belmont. I mean, you don't have. You play some at a local high school. You don't have to have a ton of seats in order to play this. The thing that's interesting to me is are we going to see non-conference games? If we see non-conference games, is there going to be maybe this push to have just regional teams play one another? I mean, might we see like an Arkansas UALR game again, or Arkansas UCA, or Arkansas State?
He said it.
Maybe we see. They're supposed to play Oral Roberts to start the season, and I know they're supposed to play Tulsa too. Maybe you see a bunch of games against those Oklahoma schools who they've already scheduled in a bubble type thing. I don't know. I think this is fascinating. I think that what they're going to end up doing with basketball is as fascinating, if not more so, than what the college football season has turned out to be. The college football. Everybody who says that the NCAA should do this and the NCAA should do that, they don't understand what they're talking about when it comes to college football. The NCAA has zero say in college football.
It's kind of sad.
Other than who can't play in bowl games. That's pretty much it.
It's kind of sad.
Postseason ban. The conferences long ago took control of college football. They haven't given it back, and they're sure as heck not going to now. The NCAA, where they're heavy-handed, their sport is basketball. And that's why the March Madness is such a big deal to them. It's a $2 billion, I think, per year, type industry. And so it's interesting to me, though, to see what's going to happen with NCAA basketball this year, because I just think that there's so many more dynamics at play with the NCAA being in charge of this than there were in college football, where the conferences were the ones who had control.
I think some decisions are going to start having to be made fairly soon. And next week, September 16th,
right?
That's the day that the Division I Council, I think, is going to vote on the proposal to start the season, the day before Thanksgiving. So we could have a date set in stone to start the season next week.
To start it Thanksgiving week, or to start it later into December. I think that, most people think that it's going to be that week of Thanksgiving. I think that it's pretty safe to say at this point that the season's going to start November 10th,
right?
Which is the start date that they've had in place for several years.
That breaks my heart, because what happens to the MGM Resorts main event out in Las Vegas?
Scotty,
I had my heart set on covering basketball in Vegas.
Scotty has told us multiple times on this podcast, Matt, I don't know that you've been in here, he really wants to go to Vegas.
I haven't been in 3 years, like I told you, and then you could also go. You could talk to Matt maybe after we're done here.
Yeah,
he could go get some exclusive footage, and me and Seth could just have a weekend.
Yeah,
you could.
It'd be great. Anyway, before we move on, talk a little bit about baseball and wrap it up here on the WholeHog Podcast. Don't you think that I forgot about Scotty's favorite segment of the entire week?
Is this Desi Sills?
No.
Oh, okay.
But that is a good point. It's Scotty's random school of the week. I've got some good hints this time. So
I'm going to have Matt help me out this time.
Yeah, Matt's here. So
I haven't gotten this in like a month.
Every week, Matt, we give Scotty some hints about our random school to get us to, learn. Because if every team's going to make the NCAA tournament this year, we got to have some background information on all of these teams, right?
Beware, I've got 2 kids under 2. My cognitive abilities aren't too good right now.
All right, well, this one, every week I have faith in Scotty, and every week he disappoints a little bit, but doesn't disappoint at the same time. So it's about what we need, entertainment value. So this week, Scotty, we're going to the Big Sky Conference. All right. So this team in the Big Sky Conference, let's see, first hint. They are that might be too easy. They are played in FCS and FBS. They play in a dome.
Oh, Idaho.
Yeah.
It's Idaho.
Yeah, it's the Kimmy Dome.
The Kimmy Dome. Yes, they are the first team to voluntarily go from FBS to FCS.
The Fighting Paul Petrinos.
Yes, that was going to be another hint.
Ring that bell.
I always liked covering Paul Petrino. He was. I think a lot of people just see him and Bobby as just the same person. They're so different, so much different personalities between the two of them. I really enjoyed covering Paul when he was here.
So we all saw the Bobby Petrino video put out by Missouri State, right?
Yes, we did.
I saw him with his arms stapled to his side.
Oh no! As he throws the ball through the window. That was cringy. I'm sorry. That looked like it was made by a first year.
It's got to be such an interesting dynamic for him, and he's been in this dynamic before. When he went from Arkansas to Western Kentucky for that year, but I feel like going from a Power 5 school to an FCS school is even a bigger. It's just a bigger adjustment because it's just so much different being a head coach in an FCS program. There's just so much more that you have to do being you're the face of the program wherever you're the head coach. But just in terms of community engagement and everything, it's just a completely different animal being at a program like Missouri State than, say like a Louisville or an Arkansas or obviously the Falcons or even a Western Kentucky. That commercial's pretty entertaining.
If you don't know what we're talking about, go to Missouri State's, I think it's Missouri State Athletics, their Twitter page.
I think it was their university Twitter page.
Oh, that's even worse.
Yeah, I think it was the Twitter. And I think at one point, doesn't the Bear throw the window through the the glass window of the university chancellor or something? Yeah, it's pretty.
That's when Petrino goes, "Oh no!
Oh no!"
I've seen Petrino get angry, and I've seen Petrino get upset. He wasn't upset then. That was fake. All right, moving on to baseball as we wrap it up here on the WholeHog Podcast. Baseball's fall practices started.
Yep.
This week. What have you seen?
Last week. Yeah, last Friday.
What did you see from the Razorbacks? Or I guess you really.
Well, I haven't seen anything.
But what did you hear from DVH as you talked to him last week, Matt?
You can't go up on the patio at the Mexican restaurant across the street and watch anymore because of the new building that's going up in right field.
It's really disappointing.
Yeah. So, they're not allowing people in to watch. I think at some point we'll be able to go over and watch some practices. The actual, makeup of what they're doing is really not that much different. Dave Van Horn in fall ball and in preseason ball, it's always been built around just scrimmaging. Their thought is that you get better by playing simulated games, and so that's what they're doing this fall. They're going to try to play as many scrimmages as they can. Say you practice 5 times a week, well, probably going to scrimmage 4 times a week. And the thing that's interesting to me is that there's going to be a lot of position battles, I think, this fall. Casey Opitz is back at catcher. He's going to be their starting catcher. And Christian Franklin's back at center field. He's going to be their starting center fielder. Robert Moore is going to start somewhere, but it's interesting that they're going to practice him at shortstop this fall and second base and see where they like him best. Obviously he was a great second baseman last year, can really turn that double play fast at that position. And who knows, he may project more to a second baseman as a big leaguer. But I think this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier with Sam Pittman and his offensive line. I think if Robert Moore makes the team better at shortstop, then that's where he's going to play this year. And so I think all the infield positions are open with that caveat that Robert Moore is clearly going to win one of those starting positions at first base. They've got to find some consistency. They didn't get it there during the short season they had earlier this year. Matt Goodhart is the ideal player at first base, but he's got the shoulder problem. And what's he like defensively? This fall, I think, is going to go a long way toward, showing that. Brady Slavens, this guy can really hit for them this year. I know Clay Henry has compared him to Kerstad. I don't know if I would go quite that far. I'd really hate to put that type of, expectations on somebody because of the way that Kerstad played. And but Slavens, he's coming from junior college, and he led junior college in home runs and RBI before the season was shut down. I think that he's an option at first base. I think Colin Smith is an option at first base. Colin Smith is a player who is a fifth-year player, transferred in here from East Tennessee State and sat out the 2020 season, and he's eligible to play this season. At second base, of course, you got Moore. I could see Jacob Nesbitt being, maybe a factor somewhere in the middle infield, whether it be second or at short. They got a guy in from McLennan Community College. That's where Dave Van Horn played junior college baseball, named Jalen Battles. I think Jalen Battles is a pretty good player, and I think that there's a decent chance that he's going to get on the field quite a bit this season. At third base, Nesbitt's been the starter there, but Caden Wallace is a really good third baseman coming in from Greenbrier. Maybe he pushes for some playing time. Michael Brooks is a really good infielder coming in out of Florida. Maybe he pushes for some playing time. So there's competition, and it's never a bad thing to have competition. I think that's what really makes you better. I think it's interesting behind catcher. You got into those midweek games last year, and they're having to play Casey Opitz every game because Kaysen Tollett was hurt and because Dominic Temez was dropping too many balls. I mean, they had a terrible experience with him in their loss to Illinois State, where he had 3 passed balls get by him, including one that ended up being a run, and Arkansas lost a 1-run game. They've got another chance this year with Opitz back to develop depth behind catcher, behind him at catcher, and really, kind of not necessarily tell you who their starter is going to be in 2021 and moving forward, but it'll give you a good indication, I think, of what they have there once Opitz finally does leave. Tollett's back. They've got a junior college catcher in who they really like. So that's their catcher situation. And then in the outfield, we mentioned Christian Franklin. They've got Braden Webb back. He played quite a bit in left field last year. They've got a ton of outfielders. Bryce Matthews is one that you didn't see play last year because he had some arm injuries. I think their outfield, I'm not going to say it's going to be the strongest part of their team by any means, but I think they've got a lot of options in their outfield. Another guy, I think they're planning on potentially playing Nate Wogelmuth 2 ways. Wogelmuth's a really good pitcher, was one of the top pitchers in the country out of Owasso, Oklahoma. I think he could be a 2-way player for him, maybe in the same way that a Brett Eibner was, or a Zach Cox in his freshman year. So those are just some of the things I'm looking at as far as position-wise. Hopefully get over there and see them some this year. I think you learned so much about the baseball team out of season. It's different than out of seasons for football and basketball because they shut their practices down. Baseball, you get to go over there and watch them, and you can really figure out a lot about the team.
I don't particularly follow baseball probably as closely as I should have, but I keep seeing Christian Franklin's name pop up. Why is that?
Because he's going to be a first-round draft pick next year, potentially. And, I'm even seeing some projections where he could be like midway through the first round type draft pick. And so you're talking about, at that point, probably a $2-3 million type signing bonus. He athletically, he is as good of an athlete, I think, as they've ever had come through here. And Dominic Fletcher was a really good center fielder. Andrew Benintendi obviously was a great center fielder. I think Franklin's got the potential to be, that type of defensive center fielder. I think he's got a really strong arm. He's real fast. When you talk to them about who stands out in the weight room, it's Christian Franklin. And then you saw it start kind of coming together last year on the field. He was off to a great start before the season got delayed. I don't have stats in front of me, but I'd probably be willing to bet that he was batting over 300, maybe over 330 when the season ended. I seem to remember that he came out of Houston batting really well, maybe had a little bit of a slump there that next week. They had put him in the leadoff spot. They liked what he was doing in front of Heston Kjerstad. And there's a lot to like about Christian Franklin, and I think the scouts really, really like him and his potential.
Franklin was batting 381.
Yeah.
Love that.
I seem to remember that when they came back from Houston, that I think he was batting leadoff and Kjerstad was batting second. And I think one was batting like 425 and the other was batting 426. They were just on fire in that 1-2. They just weren't getting a lot of production from maybe the next 4 or 5 in the order.
Yeah, that you don't necessarily want to give. You're talking about Slavens and the correlation in the really to Heston Kjerstad, and you don't necessarily want to give that because we really didn't get to see Kjerstad go to his
I think he
full
would have been
potential.
the National Player of the Year.
I don't disagree with you. I don't, because just the way that he was playing, it was going to be absurd.
And guys, it wasn't just the 16 games that we saw him play. I saw it in the preseason when he would hit 2 home runs off of a pitcher who wasn't giving up hits to anybody else. I saw it in the fall when he was their best hitter in the fall. You saw it the summer beforehand when he went with Team USA over to Japan and just knocked the cover off the baseball. He had been, and then, even into last season, he had a great second half of the SEC and, had a really good postseason. Think about the game he had against Ole Miss in Game 3 of the Super Regional. It had been a full year of him just locked in, hitting the ball as well as he ever had. And you hit better when the weather gets warmer. He was doing this when it was cold outside. I think he was in for, at minimum, SEC Player of the Year type season, possibly Golden Spikes Award type season. I think he was on pace to have maybe one of the best seasons we've ever seen by an Arkansas hitter.
Yeah, COVID very well could have taken away your opportunity to see the very best Arkansas Razorback baseball player. Could have.
Yeah.
He could have lived up to that potential, and his season was cut short, just 16 games into it.
I mean, I know why the Orioles took him. They got him at a bargain,
right?
For first, relative to the first round,
Yes.
They still gave him almost $6 million, but he was the second overall pick.
Yeah.
Whether or not it was a bargain or not, he was the second overall pick, and we got robbed of a chance to see him play the final 75% or so of his senior season or his junior season, his final season. That was a great travesty from a baseball standpoint, was that we didn't get to see him play more, because I just think he was on pace to have, or maybe not on pace, but I think he was set to have just one of the great offensive years that we've ever seen. Maybe I compared what he did through 16 games with what Andrew Benintendi did through 16 games in 2015. Benintendi's numbers couldn't hold a candle to what Kjerstad was doing. It was incredible.
Yeah, he was batting 448 through 16 games, starting all of them with 19 runs, 30 hits. He already had 6 home runs and 20 RBIs. So I think he was doing all right. That's just a little absurd. All right, guys, a solid hour of Razorback sports put in today. We got anything else to add before we head on out? All right. They're both shaking their heads at me, so that means that we're good. Here on the WholeHog Podcast, we want to thank you for listening to this solid hour. We will continue to put out podcasts weekly covering Arkansas football, basketball, baseball, as you said, or as you saw and heard on this podcast, that we do it all, and we will continue to do it all throughout the upcoming rest of this year and into 2021. So make sure to hit that subscribe button, make sure to like, and also go over to WholeHogSports.com That's where you can find a whole lot of these stories. You can also find some stories in the description. There'll be some links there if you want some more information, maybe about Bielema's contract, or you want some more information on some of the football guys. Anything that you want, you can find that over at WholeHogSports.com. Big shout out to our entire WholeHogSports.com crew, but especially to Matt Jones and Scotty Borderline for joining us this week. Well, for those guys, I am Seth Campbell saying so long, and we'll see you back here next week.